everyone, it's Jade from Boho Bookworm. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my June wrap up. I've got a couple of books to talk about today, so let's just dive right on in. The first book I'm going to speak about today is The Whisper Man by Alex North. So when I initially heard about the premise of this book, it piqued my interest straight away. Widowed father and a son on their way to this new town to start a new life, start over fresh, only to discover that the town that they've moved to has a very dark history. There's all these rumours and stories going around about this serial killer that used to plague the town, and he used to basically whisper into little children's ears to lure them away. And now, after decades of peace, things are starting to happen again. That premise to me sounds so good, so promising, but however, I just can't handle slow-paced books. The thing with The Whisper Man is it really got overhyped. I mean, so many of my friends raved about it, they loved it. It's a very popular book, so I do feel like I'm in the minority here. I just didn't connect with this book at all. I'll be honest, when I pick up a thriller, I want something thrilling. I want something fast-paced, gripping, exciting, and that's just not The Whisper Man. I kind of felt like The Whisper Man was more of a crime book focusing on the mystery, and that's not my kind of read. I don't enjoy that kind of stuff at all. I found myself really bored with this book, and the characters were just really bland. They didn't shine or present themselves in a memorable kind of way. I mean, I'm not going to remember this book at all. In fact, the best part about it for me was when the abduction finally happens and we go down a more psychological kind of route. What happens is this child gets abducted and they end up creating this kind of imaginary friend that helps them through this ordeal. And that to me was really interesting. And then nearing the end of the book, we discover the importance of this imaginary friend and who they really are to this kid. I also enjoyed the bits where we got into the kidnapper's head. However, it wasn't enough for the story to be saved for me. It's not a thriller. It's an eerie mystery that I just kind of found to be quite anticlimactic. So I ended up giving it a 2-star review. Then we have the plot. Oh my god, I've got such a fright, did you hear that? I don't know what's wrong with me lately. I'm so spooked out by everything. Calm down. Then we have The Plot by Hanff Korelitz. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that and butchering it. It could be Jean, I don't know. One of my favourite booktubers, Gabby, she loves her thrillers and her horrors. She raves about this book. She says it's one of her favourite thrillers, I think this year. I believe it was published in May 2021, so it's a new release. And again, the premise of this book captured my attention right away. So this is a story about this guy called Jacob Bono, who's this kind of failed writer. He's now a teacher doing a course with aspiring authors and fresher writers to help them achieve their dreams of becoming best-selling novelists. One day he hears the plot for one of his students' manuscripts, and this plot just haunts him. He just knows that this book is going to be a bestseller one day, and he's, I guess I'm a writer, and if you hear something, you're just oh my god, I wish I'd come up with that storyline. I can only imagine how frustrating that must be. The next thing that happens is we find out that this student is an absolute arrogant ass. So time goes on and Jacob's just waiting for this book to get released and become this massive hit. But the book just never materializes over the years. So he ends up Googling his old student because he's why isn't this book, this explosive novel that's just come out in the world, And he discovers that his students actually died before he was able to probably even write this book. So now he has this dilemma, he could actually take this story because, Jacob's got, the student's gone now, so hey ho. He makes a decision and he takes the plot and he writes it and he becomes this massive success. Until one day, these anonymous threats start to come through. And all these rumours on the internet and stuff about him lying, plagiarising, stealing this work comes out. How far is this person going to go to prove that Jacob stole this work? And who is this anonymous person? The student's dead. I personally wondered if the author of the plot got a bit of his inspiration from the whole AJ Finn, Dan Mallory kind of debacle that happened a while ago. That aside, the crux of the story is surrounded around the controversial question of whether an author really owns a plot or not. I mean, you could have a million books about witches and wizards and stuff. J.K. Rowling doesn't own that wizarding world, but she does own Harry Potter, which is like the best. And then it's like Vampire Diaries and True Blood and God knows what other vampire stuff there's out there. But some people just kind of think that if you write another book about or you have an idea about a book for witches and wizards, then you're just going to be kind of stealing from the world of Harry Potter. But that's not really true, is it? Anyway, Twilight, that's the one that I was trying to think of. Again, I found this book really slow paced, but as a writer myself, I was so heavily invested in the story, more so than The Whisper Man, which I just didn't connect with at all. I also found this book painfully predictable. I instantly clicked with who the anonymous troll was. I just knew straight away, which normally would really irritate me in a book. Like, I need a twist, a shocking turn, something to be like, oh my god, wow, I did not see that coming. So despite it being slow paced and predictable, I still found the plot really sucked me in. It demanded my attention, it was clever and really well written in its simplicity. It did take me a little while to get into this one, but I'm so glad that I persevered because I ended up really enjoying it. Is it scary? No. Is it suspenseful? No. Should you let that put you off from reading the book? Hell no. From everything I've said, it sounds like it should be a negative review. So it's really hard to put into words like how good this book really is, because it's a very hard book to review for that reason. I found the main character, Jacob, to be really bland and boring, but that made him really interesting. As the whole story unfolds, you just can't help but invest your time into him. We have his view on the world of literature. It's the ending of this book that really shines through. It steals the show, it makes everything worth it. Okay, so it's one thing to write an evil villain. It's another to have an epilogue that just leaves you speechless. It was the definition of the icing on top of the cake. Literally my only qualm with it is that it was too predictable. There was just too much given away and information peppered throughout the start of the book that just gets you to figure it out really easily. I do wish that the author had found a way to make it more subtle, because it was agonisingly obvious, but then I still gave the book 4 out of 5 stars. So it's such a strange and bizarre book to review. Then we have The Photographer by Mary Dixie Carter. I bought this book on a whim. I'd not heard a thing about it before, but I saw the cover when I was on Goodreads reviewing another book and I was like, oh, that looks good. Then I read the premise and I was like, yes, obsession, stalking, count me in. The Photographer is what you would class as your typical popcorn thriller. This is a book about this woman called Delta Dawn, and she's basically, her whole life, she hasn't grown up well. She comes from nothing, but she's become this really sought after photographer for the elite in New York. What she can do behind the lens of a camera is a work of absolute art. The way that she manipulates images and those around her is brilliant. And her latest event that she's working for is this 11-year-old girl's birthday party for the Straub family. So when she arrives, she starts taking pictures and she realises that just editing the pictures isn't enough. She wangles her way into this family's life by helping out their kid, befriending the mother, kind of forming an obsession with the father. She discovers the family's vulnerable spots so that she can find a way to slot into their lives permanently. The Photographer is a slow burn book with a bit of a You by Caroline Kepnes feel to it. I do feel like authors in recent times are definitely digging their claws into characters with the kind of You by Caroline Kepnes, Joe Goldberg feel to them, obsessed, stalkerish, maybe being overdone a little bit. But then it's that book, the plot, Caroline Kepnes doesn't own the plot of a stalker, does she? It's all very it's an interesting conversation to have, I think. So while The Photographer was good, personally I didn't really feel like it had anything different from You by Caroline Kepnes. So it was nothing that was just woof, wow. I wanted something just that little bit extra, something a little bit more fresh, give me something new. I also felt like this book was quite unbelievable. The rich and elite in New York City would not just allow some random woman into their lives the way that this family did without doing a background check on her first, especially when they've got a child involved. It also lacked twists and turns, which really could have elevated this novel. I wish that it had gone more into like the psychological aspects of things as well. And what really bothered me was I didn't understand Delta's obsession with this family, because really there was nothing really that special about them. The way that the author described the husband, I didn't get Delta's attraction towards him at all. The mother was this like selfish narcissist, and the poor little daughter, like her little story broke my heart. It was a good, worthy thriller. You know, it was entertaining in parts, fun, dark, creepy, with trigger warnings for infertility and miscarriages. I'll give this book a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Then we have You Love Me by Caroline Kepnes, the 3rd book in the You series, which, more Joe Goldberg. Yes, please. Obviously, I was highly anticipating this release. I mean, the whole premise of like the You series is really fun. It's, you know, Joe is this psychopath that you just can't help but love, which is a bit weird. It did take me a little bit of time actually to get into this book, because it had been such a long time since I'd read Hidden Bodies, the 2nd book in the series. Caroline Kepnes definitely takes her time in releasing books in this series, especially considering we've been in a pandemic for like the past bloody God knows how long anymore, I've lost count. I was struggling to remember all the certain parts that happened in Hidden Bodies that led Joe to where he was now. In the 3rd book, he's on this small island volunteering at this bookshop and like intensely brooding over this older MILF librarian, for lack of better wording. To be honest, I kind of felt like this book was a little bit repetitive. In this book, Joe really does try to prove that he's changed, but, you know, some things are not changeable, as if it never changes their spots, as they say. Obsession and stalking is definitely one of Joe's things that is never going to go away. So Joe's latest obsession, this woman is married to this kind of burnt out, washed out rock star. She has a daughter and this raging feminist best friend, and every single character in this book is so toxic and destructive. Everyone's deeply flawed, not likable at all, besides maybe like the odd mothball. It seems like wherever Joe goes, bad things happen, people die, even if it isn't his doing. What's interesting about the You series is that we watch Joe grow as a character. There's definitely a calmer side to Joe in this book. He's doing his best to control his urges and his impulses. He learned his lesson, so to speak, and so in this book I noticed that he was older and wiser. There's a lot of like Joe Goldberg witty sarcasm peppered throughout this book, which I thought was really fun. But there were things that made me knock off the start. Like, Joe just seemed quite annoying in this book. He was really overbearing at times. Like, sometimes I just couldn't be asked to read the book. And I don't think it was done in a way that the author intended. He gave people's body parts names. Like, he gave this librarian's vagina the name of Murakami because the book she was reading or something. I was just like, oh, I'm never going to look at Murakami the same. And he uses words like gunner, and okay, I don't remember the first 2 books and how he spoke, but I just don't feel like Joe is the kind of character that would use the word gunner, like I'm gonna go here. And I know that he has maybe picked that up because of his latest obsession as librarian and stuff, because that's kind of how she speaks, but just bothered me, it irked me as someone that loves literature. And the way he ranted on about anything and everything just was too much. And he also, like, I kind of picked up in this book that he had some kind of like OCD, and maybe that's a common thing with psychopaths and serial killers and stuff like that. He just seemed very fussy in this book. It's like just really snobbish and afraid of just general dirt being on his hands. Like, I picked up on that quite a number of times, and I wondered what Kepnes was trying to do there. Like, I wish that she'd kind of given us more clues into what she was trying to tell us about Joe and the intricacies that he has. At first as well, like, I was not very interested in the parts of the book featuring the librarian's daughter. I just didn't really get her part in the story. I thought she was quite annoying, took away from the actual story, but you appreciate it nearing the end of the book when you realise her role and everything, and that was very interesting and clever. It was a highly entertaining read, full of shock factors and twists, and bloody hell, that ending, I loved it. I really hope that she brings out the next book sooner, because I can't wait that long again. I mean, obviously Joe kills people, there's something very wrong with him, but I did find that was really centre stage in this book. His mental health was deteriorating. He has like these deranged delusions, and honestly it rubbed me the wrong way how controlling he was within himself. Like the things he'd say to himself and make himself believe, like saying about this librarian in his head, like he was like, you want me, you're hot for me, da da da. I was just like, go away, it's just disgusting and controlling, and stop being such a delusionist. I don't even know if that's a word. You see, it gets me angry. I also found him very bitter and smug in this book. Overall, I just didn't find his character quite as endearing as I did with the first two books. He was quite narcissistic and shallow, and just saw a different side to Joe in many different ways. Like the calmer, more mature side to him was there, but then also this more bitter side. It was very hard to pin him down, but solid 4 out of 5 stars from me. And the last book I'm going to speak to you about today is called Give Me the Child by Mel McGrath. This is a psychological domestic thriller about this woman called Dr. Kat Lupo, and basically she is aching for another child despite the fact that her first pregnancy brought with it a lot of psychosis. Her and her husband have been struggling for ages, and it just seems like it's not going to happen. And then one day there's a knock at their door, like in the middle of the night, and there's this little girl there with the police, and she's claiming to be her husband's daughter, her love child, and his love child. But she's like the same age, close enough, as Kat's daughter. So she realises, oh, hang on, so while I was in hospital, my husband had an affair, and this is now the love child. What are you to do? You've got to take in this child. She's got nowhere else to go. And it becomes very apparent very quickly that this little girl, Ruby Winter, she could pose quite a dangerous, sinister threat to her and her family. So this book was originally published in 2017, I think. Since like 2017, around that time, there's been a lot of books with the unreliable narrator guzzling bottle after bottle of wine, and it's just kind of getting overdone and becoming a bit more of a cliche. However, there were very interesting parts of this book that made it special. We follow Kat on her wide range of emotions, such as figuring out that her husband has had this affair, taking in this daughter that has nowhere else to go, having to accept that. Also the fact that, she can't leave her husband, she can't divorce him, because if she gets angry or reacts a certain bad way, because of her psychosis, she could actually lose custody of her child. Also coming to terms with the fact that she realises that it's not her husband's fault that they haven't been able to conceive a child. It's her fault, it's her body that's basically broken. We're with her as she resentfully accepts all these details about her life, and it has to carry on and just be normal, or relatively normal. And inevitably kind of leads it onto a downward spiral. I mean, the things that this little girl is doing, in a normal circumstance, it might be easier to kind of fix them and sort the girl out, but in her circumstance, she's got to react a certain way. I think as a reader, it's impossible not to ache for Kat's situation. It's a compulsive, captivating, entertaining read, and it has that creepy kid element that I tend to love in a book. It's far from the best thriller that I've ever read, but it's also not the worst. Just a nice, light, easy thriller that you'll read it, you'll enjoy it while you're reading it, and then you'll put it down and you'll be like, oh, okay, next. Sorry, that's horrible. But yeah, just a solid all-round 3-star read for me. And they're the books that I read in June. Let me know what you read throughout June, your favourite read. I always love to hear from you, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.